Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys in a Stack of Comics. Here to join me, as always, is Mike. Mike, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, Reed. How about you?
Doing good, and we get to dive into the next couple of videos. You and I are going to dive into something we've been talking a lot about: villains, comic book villains. As equal a part of the medium as the heroes themselves. Some would say that what makes a great hero is its villains, and we want to kind of talk about this over the next couple episodes. We're going to talk about what we think makes a great villain and a little bit of what we think is lacking in the first part. And in the second part, we're going to talk a little bit about why we think we are where we are with villains right now. And then the third, kind of maybe where some corrective things could happen to fix it. So next couple of videos will be focused on this. Mike, look, the villains are a huge appeal for the characters. I would say, as a Batman fan, the Batman Rogues Gallery is probably one of the biggest things that makes him the character that he is and as popular as he is. For you as a Flash fan, I know the Rogues and Reverse Flash have been a big part. So if I mention a comic book villain to you, what makes a great comic book villain in your opinion?
Well, you got to put all the ingredients together, right? A great comic book villain should have, but this isn't always the case, but should have powers that are equal to or almost equal to the hero, either mentally or gadgetry, like the Trickster does for the Flash, um, or Grodd with his, mental telepathy abilities. Those kind of things, have to be an element, I think, for the villains because they're going up against super powered beings, so they got to have a gadget, a gimmick, or power that's equal to or almost equal to the hero. That's number one. The other thing that has to be there for a villain is to have a really good villain, you have to really, as the reader, hate that villain. So you've got
Mhm.
to build in some kind of insidiousness, some kind of injustice that has happened, something dastardly, comes to as a good word that comes to mind. To when you think of it as like Batman has got to get that Joker this time, or Flash has got to beat Reverse Flash this time. Um, that has to be all the best villains really have that in them where they have done something shocking, horrible, beyond the pale, dastardly, and have that character that you can get behind your hero and loathe them just as much as the hero does. And they have to be, I think they have to be mentally challenging for the hero. There
Mhm.
has to be an element like with the Joker in the Batman. They're on opposite spectrums, right? And but they have no superpowers. But Joker has his gadgets and his mental trickery,
Mhm.
or like the Riddler. Oh, the Riddler's a good one, where he can almost outthink Batman. Something like that has to be incorporated into the hero, where they mentally match the hero. And then when you combine them all together, then you've got this villain that can challenge your hero that you can get behind and hate. And that makes for an interesting story. That just makes for great comics.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's huge that you, as a fan of the main character, and obviously, look, if you're buying superhero books, typically you're mainly invested in that hero's journey. The greatest villains are the ones you hate, where you're like, oh, that you see that son of a like that. You
Yeah.
can't stand that character. And to me, I look at the two, in my opinion, best comic book villains, and I know I'm probably not in the majority of this, but I think the two best villains in comics have been Bane and Green Goblin. And I know those are kind of random, but why I love Bane, I Chuck Dixon and that entire '90s team, Graham Nolan, I think the guys who designed Bane, to create a character for Batman who is such an established hero with so many skills. Instead of creating this mindless thug, they create this brilliant strategist who finds the perfect strategy to break down Batman, frees all his villains, wears him out, and then when Batman's at his weakest, Bane finds him and snaps his back. And I
Yeah.
hated, as a child, I remember reading that story and I remember hating Bane. I remember being like that. I mean, as a kid, that story left such an imprint on me of like the face of evil is that dang mask that Bane has.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think where they were so brilliant is you found this foe who physically Batman can't beat. And normally your solution would, well, Batman's got to be smarter than him. And while he
Yeah.
is, they also made Bane really smart. And so I think
Yes.
what makes a great villain is when you put them, I think, almost more powerful than the hero. When you put the hero in the David versus Goliath scenario, or Rocky versus Apollo Creed, whatever your underdog story that you connect to is, I think the same thing for Spider-Man and Green Goblin. In that, how many times has Goblin gotten the better of Peter? I think
Yeah.
the other part is what makes a great villain, and I think Green Goblin's the best example of this. You have to let the villain beat the hero every once in a while. And I think for fans, that's so important. I think when you look at Spider-Man, what's interesting is there was Doc Ock was kind of the main Spidey villain for most folks. He
Right.
was seen as his greatest nemesis. And then Goblin, in this, after the death of Gwen Stacy, it was like, no, the greatest Spider-Man villain is the Green Goblin because he has this eternal, permanent victory over Peter in the death of Gwen Stacy. And it makes you hate that character. You see the Green Goblin in that cackle in the glider, and you're like, that jerk, man. He
You
killed
got to
Gwen.
get
I think,
him.
yeah, you want Spidey to just pummel the crap out of Norman
Right.
Osborn when
Yeah.
he's there. And I think, and again, they did a great job with Osborn's a scientific genius. So Peter's natural advantage would be his brain power, not necessarily the case against Norman. Norman has resources and tech and billions of dollars behind him. And then he's strong and has all these gadgets that he fights him with. It again puts Spidey in the role of being the underdog. And so I think they have to risk you hating the villain, but it's what makes them great because
Yeah.
what I think is missing out of some of this, Mike, and I think I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I hate Bane when Bane shows up in stories now, and I think Green Goblin. I like the redemption thing they're doing because it's interesting, but I got tired of him showing up because what I thought used to make them great, Bane didn't show up in regular stories. When Bane showed up, it was like, oh man, this is an event. Like this
Yeah.
is not your standard issue. This crazy guy is back. And I felt the same way with Goblin when it was a Green Goblin story arc for Spider-Man. I was like, okay, things are going to be real in these. And I feel like writers used to treat those sort of characters. Joker obviously is the same way with gravitas, where it was like, this is not just Detective Comics issue 483 or whatever. This is a Joker issue.
Yeah.
Anything could happen. I feel like some of that's been lost. Do you feel like there used to be more of a gravitas towards some of these major villains like Reverse Flash for Barry or something like that?
Oh yeah. When Reverse Flash was entered into a story, it was always a main event, like Bane.
Hmm.
Uh, and you could say the same for Loki and Thor,
Yep.
You hate Loki because he always tricks Thor, but then you kind of have to get on to Thor because he always lets Loki trick him.
Yeah.
It drives you crazy, but that's what makes a good story. You're like, no, don't trust him again. Um, yeah, uh, you could get villain fatigue, if Bane was in every issue or the Joker was in every issue, you know, you have to, I think ideally as a storyteller, you would hold back those main villains for the culmination of the series, or you would, sporadically put them in to spice up a storyline.
Hmm.
That's what makes the top villains. You look at Lex Luthor versus Superman.
Yeah.
um, he uses his mind and his mental thinking to outthink Superman, and of course he has endless resources, right? But yeah, you got to hate the villain, and the biggest and the best villains should always be saved for the biggest and the best stories.
Well, I think what also makes a villain is something about the hero too, and this is where your Punishers and your Wolverines are different. But this is where I do think what makes a great villain and puts the hero on their back feet typically. For me, in a Batman story, what's always great is the no kill rule for Batman
That
makes the
puts them at a
villains a lot more
disadvantage.
dramatic because every villain inherently has the advantage of they're willing to go to a place that Bruce won't.
Yeah.
Bruce could beat them, but he might kill them. And so it's how does Batman stop the Riddler while saving people without taking lethal measures to end the Riddler? Right. I think one of the games that did this best, and again, it's a video game, but it was such a perfectly written game by Paul Dini, the Batman Arkham Asylum video
Oh
game
yeah.
where there's a very early portion of the game where Joker's like, just throw the batarang, knock me off, kill me, end it
Yeah.
once and for all. And
Right.
Bruce won't do it. And you can argue somewhat, maybe he should have or whatever, but that's the drama in a Batman story. The drama in a Batman story is the easy, quick, permanent solution is not an option for our hero. And I
Right.
think what's so interesting to me is I think when you look at our primary heroes that we have typically loved in comics, Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, those are the big three. Those are all the ones that most seem to emphasize they don't kill. And
Right.
I think that's part of what makes a great villain story is you have to have that present too. And that I think the only Wolverine villain that really works because Wolverine kills is Sabretooth because it's so dang hard to kill Sabretooth, where it's like it's the
Right.
one guy that's not an option for him.
Yeah.
Do you think putting the hero in? I think we've talked a little bit about villains, but do you think there only should be that distinction where the hero doesn't kill and the villain does? Like, how important do you think that is to the dynamic of villains and heroes in comics?
I think it's kind of inherently built in from the almost the beginning. The early Batman issues, he did.
Yeah, your first few,
Yeah,
he's
he did
shooting
like,
vampires dead in their graves early on. Yeah,
yeah. But after that point, and this was a medium that was, developed for kids, but it also always had a strong moral compass in general from the 40s on. And so, we want our heroes to be good guys. I know we've spent the last 20, 30 years delving into what if our heroes were not so good. And for my taste, that's run its course. It was interesting for a while.
Mhm.
Uh, but for my taste, that's kind of run its course. We want our heroes to be good guys, and we want them to have a moral compass. And having that no kill rule um, it does two functions. Number one, it helps us understand and appreciate the hero for being, more morally strong, but it also puts them at a disadvantage when they're up against, horrible murderers and criminals that have these gadgets or superpowers or whatever to go after them and always be on the right side. Like I will go this far, and we'll put you in Arkham Asylum, where you will easily escape in the next 20 issues. But that's where we'll go with that. Yeah, and Batman's faith in Arkham Asylum is never diminishes.
He always thinks I'll throw him in to stop him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Take care of it. Yeah. But that's just the way it is. The poor security guards at Arkham, they never get an even break. Well, they get lots of jail breaks, but anyway.
No, I think lastly, what I would touch on with this, I think complexity is often what makes these characters the best, and I think that's what makes great villains. Is I think we've conflated a couple things, and we'll talk about this more in our second part, which is where we think some of this has gone wrong. But you can make a really complex villain without necessarily making the villain sympathetic. And I think a great example of this, I mean, you know more about his history than I do, but I loved the angle they took with the Reverse Flash in terms of originally, if I'm correct, Mike, he wants to be like Barry. He
Yeah,
looks up to him,
yeah,
and
he
then
does.
that gets corrupted to where he's okay. Now I will destroy you, and it's like
Right.
you don't empathize with Thawne, but it's a complex motivation of
Yeah,
wanted to be like the hero, fell, that kind of stuff. I think Bane being this, kid who was basically grown up in a prison, raised in a prison, and he breaks out, and Batman becomes this like ultimate foe that he believes he needs to conquer. It makes him complex it doesn't mean you sympathize with Bane or you're like, is Bane right? And I think we've conflated some of that of same with Magneto, and I think he's, we'll talk a lot about him in the next part, but Magneto, obviously, look, complex character, grew up in, the worst historical events maybe ever in terms of being in Auschwitz and things like that, but he ends up becoming the monster. And there's a huge complexity to him as a character because of that. I feel like, Mike, they don't write the complexity as well as they used to. I think we sometimes now have there's a huge difference between the mustache twirling villains that are one-off characters and the classics, the Lex Luthors, the Jokers, the Reverse Flashes, the Banes, the Green Goblins, where it's like that character is a full character. He's not just this evil, malevolent force. There's something in where you can mirror and go, okay, I see how he ended up where he is, but you don't need to conflate that with having compassion for them. Do you feel like that's a huge piece that we used to get that maybe we don't get as much now?
Absolutely. And so, like, what we've done over the last 20, 30 years is we've broken our heroes down to where they're just average guys. And then we have, created sympathetic and empathetic backstories for the heroes or for the villains to where we empathize with them more than we should. And so now we're in this weird gray area where the superheroes aren't that great and the villains really aren't that bad. So what kind of stories are we telling? What kind of stories are we telling here? That's not the formula that works.
Yeah, and I think they have to get. I think this is probably more for the next video, but I think they have to get back. And I think the character that shows that used to be an amazing villain that I think is awful now is Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn,
Oh
when
yeah.
she showed up, great character. This, obviously tragic backstory and the psychologist that the Joker largely manipulates and abuses. But then she becomes this unrepentant murderer. And so it was something that was made her a great character, was she was like a more sane Joker that you felt empathy for, but there was no thought of like, oh, poor Harley. It was more,
Yeah.
no, this is a psychopath who kills people, and you
Yeah.
feel a little bad for her, but she's still bad. I think that was what made her great. They try now, like you said, to so much make you empathize. Oh, well, maybe she wasn't even that bad. And I think that breaks the immersion of this.
Yeah.
So next video, we're going to talk a lot about where we think this has gone wrong. And I think what we can do is kind of take some characters that are great and contrast them with what we're getting now. I think one I'm going to point out for sure is what they've done with like Star Wars. And I know that's not in the comic realm, but I think that's the most stark example we have. Now, before we close this one out, Mike, who's the greatest comic book villain of all time to you? If you had to pick one, who's the greatest comic villain of all time?
To me personally, it's Eobard Thawne,
Okay.
the Reverse Flash. That guy he gets under my skin when they put him in a story. But if I had to go like, in all of comicdom,
Yeah.
um, the Joker would probably be
Take the
the
top spot.
yeah, I would say.
Yeah, my personal favorite is Bane. Um, I would say I think it's between Joker and Lex as the greatest. I'll be honest. As a Batman fan, I know I should say Joker.
Yeah,
I will argue against myself and say I think it's actually Lex Luthor though, when
yeah,
done right. And I think sadly we've gotten so many poor versions of Lex Luthor. But
right.
like I think the greatest villain ever is like Lex Luthor on that Superman the animated series. I thought
Yeah,
was so perfectly done in that. He's basically evil Bruce Wayne, and he's the
yeah,
perfect foil for
yeah,
Superman
exactly, right.
because Superman could use his powers and get him, but Superman's like, no, I have to do this by the book. I got to do it the right way. And I love that challenge for. I just always love the dichotomy of this human being who cannot beat Superman physically in a fight, but just looks for ways to torture Superman constantly. And I thought that was good, but I wouldn't argue anybody saying the Joker. Doctor Doom would be up there, Green Goblin, but I would probably personally say Lex, but I think it's close. Even though as a Batman fan, I know I'm supposed to say Joker. It is the greatest of all time. Let us know, folks. What do you think makes a great villain? Who's your favorite villain or the villain, I guess, that that you hate the most in comics, that you think is a great villain. And if you agree with us or disagree with us, just let us know. Our next video in this, we're going to talk about where we think a lot of this has gone wrong, why we're getting some weaker villains in the medium now, and just our observations on where that has gone, especially in comic books, where it's kind of gone to a place that we think they need to take some corrective action. As always, folks, let us know what you think below. God bless you. You have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.